just about to go on a bit of a boat tour under the bridges over there. I thought we'd try and capture from this angle when we can. A cruise ship in the Firth. There's various places. I think my shadow's helping matters. Showing all the things you can see from here. Anyone wants to read it. Mythical Palace. Keep your eyes peeled. Don't want to do any spoilers. That was one of the things I hoped to do today, but just ran out of time. We have the old Forth Road Bridge. These for buses and taxis, I believe now. Buses definitely. The rail bridge over there. And the new Queen's Ferry Bridge. You'll see all three from a different angle pretty soon. Queen's Ferry Bridge.
These bridges link the north of Scotland to the south of Scotland and England, perhaps bookmarked buildings in the history of the world. The 19th century can be marked by the Forth Rail Bridge, the Red Cantilever Bridge, built before cars and aircraft existed during the reign of Queen Victoria. It opened in 1890. Around the same time, Rudolf Diesel invented the diesel engine. Shredded wheat was the new breakfast cereal. Fingerprinting becomes possible. Aspirin is developed and X-rays discovered. Scotland was then the second richest nation on earth. The Forth Rail Bridge, the red one, was inscribed as a World Heritage Site by the United Nations body UNESCO, so it now enjoys the same status as the Taj Mahal and the Great Wall of China. Queen Elizabeth II opened the Forth Rail Bridge less than 2 years after the assassination of American President John F. Kennedy, the very same year that Philips introduced the music cassette. Chemotherapy was first used to treat cancer, and Beatlemania was taking the world by storm with All My Loving and I Wanna Hold Your Hand. Now, the red Forth Rail Bridge was built at a cost of £3 million. The silver Forth Road Bridge was built for £11.5 million 74 years later. Now, here in the 21st century, a further 50 plus years later, the Queen's Ferry Crossing is the newest addition to the scenery, a concept built with a 21st century budget of around £1.5 billion, not million, £1.5 billion pounds. The river narrows, making this a very good crossing point. Boatmen have operated here since the beginning of time, and the very last self-employed boatman only stopped in 1809. And then the pier we have just left was built by John Rennie, who was a very accomplished, successful and brilliant engineer. His plan was to build 4 good piers along the seafront of straight line without tacking, regardless of what direction, and you could dock any one of the views. As we stated, brilliant value and brilliant plan. But John Maddy was just not far-sighted enough to realize that sailing boats were on the way out. Steamships were the new technology of the future. The very first steamship went into service here in 1821 and was named Queen Mark. The man herself the ferry service here in 1070 to give free passage to pilgrims travelling to the holy sites of Dunfermline and Stanley. And the battleship era did come to an end, eventually in 1964, with Queen Elizabeth II aboard the very final sailing as she opened the Fourth Road Bridge.
There. That's the start of the first bridge that was going to be built, marked by the lighthouse. Unfortunately, that designer had built the Tay Bridge, which collapsed. So all work stopped, and that's the only bit of construction that remains from the original bridge. It was going to be built, it was never, I don't think it got very far past the foundation stage. Waterized Lake Island is over 50 meters deep.
This is an island also rich with history. Have a close look as we go by. Try to see the oldest stonework, because that's the important bit. The old stonework is all that remains of Inchgarvie Castle that was built in 1495. This island also operated as a state prison until around 1670, when it was in the mid-1600s. The English Oliver Cromwell, he'd taken control of Edinburgh. He was advancing his troops throughout Scotland.
Bloody Oliver Cromwell
He was
again.
aiming for Stirling Castle. He already had Tantallon Castle at Dunbar, Blackness Castle upstream, and Inchgarvie Castle here he took on the 17th day of July, 1651. At this point in the river, in the space of 2 days, over 4,000 English troops crossed to North Queensferry in little boats, and then they all became embroiled in the battle of the Bridge. The bulls are the daddy seals, the cows are the mummies, and the pups are the baby seals. The baby grey seals are usually born around November. Seals derive from a family known as pinniped, and pinniped means to have winged feet. The pups usually have a luxurious silky white fur when they're born, and they keep that until they become adults. We have seals here of all colours, and some are even spotty like Dalmatian dogs. However, they are all called grey seals. If you see any today, you will notice that there is no such thing as being too fat in the seal world. In these cold North Sea waters, seals do carry around 2 or 3 inches of blubber from worms. But their cylindrical shape, now this is clever, it not only makes them streamlined for swimming, their shape minimises heat loss as well. Nowadays in peacetime, Inchcombe Island is a truly wonderful place to visit, or even just to look at. A truly remarkable place with a history going back in time as far as anybody can. Solitude and tranquility, the haven for wildlife. The island is now maintained by Historic Scotland, but the main feature here, of course, is the magnificent office that it has. Scotland's most complete example of a nesting house. Can you see the red and white lighthouse out in the water, the Oxcars Light? This beacon was another of the hundreds built by Scotland's famous lighthouse family, the Stephensons. And this one built in 1886 for the Northern Lighthouse Board. But of course, you'll probably all know the famous grandson in the Stephenson family. The author of Treasure Island, Robert Louis Stevenson. And now, over 200 years old, the Northern Lighthouse.
Who hollowed the Bridge of Allen along with Charles Dickens, I think we'll find.
Providing safe navigation and guidance to all mariners. This very important organisation has a royal patron, Her Royal Highness the Princess. There were excavations dug in an attempt to build a tunnel underneath the river to make a crossing. They were abandoned, but in the year 1850, an engineer built the world's first floating railway line further out, just past Inchcombe Island, linking up the two mainlands. His name, Thomas Bodge. He built the floating railway ferry, but more importantly, he was the designer of the very first fourth rail bridge. And I say the first because there are actually 2 fourth rail bridges. All 75 passengers were killed. The worst rail disaster in Scottish history. Bodge was disgraced. The establishment no longer trusted his designs. In the aftermath of this disaster, the requirements for a bridge over the Forth were reassessed. The railway needed to cross the Forth. Designers Sir John Fowler and Benjamin Baker came up with a cantilever arrangement that we see now. What resulted was a marvel of Victorian engineering and a span so massively overbuilt that it barely moves in even the heaviest wind. To this day, we have a saying in the English language that occurred because of the Tay-Rail disaster. If you make a bad job of something, you would say, "I've made a right old botch of that, a botched job." The rail bridge was formally completed on the 4th of March 1890, when His Royal Highness Edward, Prince of Wales, tapped into place the traditional golden rivet, the last rivet of over 7.5 million rivets used. 57 men lost their lives building the Forth Rail Bridge. Men who had come from all corners of the world, Canada, America, Poland and Hungary. It was the largest civil engineering structure achieved during the 19th century, and probably only made possible by means of the cantilever principle. What did it cost to build? Now obviously loads of money, but there's a curious coincidence. The Red Forth Rail Bridge cost £3 million in 1890. The Silver Forth Road Bridge cost £11.5 million 7 74 years later. And now, here in the 21st century, a person 50 plus years later, the Queensferry crossing cost £1.5 billion. But when you work the relative values back in time, all the bridges cost pretty much the same, strangely enough. The Red Forth Rail Bridge was recently inscribed as a World Heritage Site, so it now enjoys the very same status as the Taj Mahal and the Great Wall of China. 7 years of construction, 7,000 rivets, 57 deaths, built before cars and aircraft existed during the reign of Queen Victoria. It opened in 1890. Around the same time, Rudolf Diesel invented the diesel engine, fingerprinting became possible, aspirin was developed, and X-rays discovered. Scotland was then the second richest nation on Earth. This bridge is massively over-engineered using cantilevers. If it rains, she gets 100 tons heavier. If the sun shines on her, she stretches more than 7 meters. And she is 50 feet taller than Big Ben. Now briggers, as they were called, briggers, they came from all around the world to build this bridge. They started work at 4 every morning. Riveting was the main job here, working in teams. The youngest member would be the rivet boy. Now he would usually be 13 or 14 years old. His job was to heat the rivets until they were poker red hot, and using long-handled tongs he would then toss each rivet to his team higher up. It was caught, placed in the hole, and hammered home. It was a brutal, dangerous, dirty, cold, miserable job, and as regards money, well, the team were paid by the number of rivets. Now with the ever-increasing popularity of cars, the middle bridge, the Forth Road Bridge, it became a necessity as the royal car ferry came. Queen Elizabeth II back in 1964. That was the year when chemo was first used to treat cancer. Philips introduced the audio cassette. And talking of music, the Beatles, they were taking the charts by storm. Now this road bridge was record-breaking in 1964. However, they built it with old cable binding technology that was first pioneered on the Brooklyn Bridge. It dates back to the 1870s. It was the same tech they used on the Golden Gate Bridge, and this indeed does look very much like the Golden Gate Bridge, doesn't it? As you'll see, the vehicle deck is suspended across 2 giant towers by 2 giant cables, but not all is as it seems. The 2 giant cables are each bindings of over 11,000, much smaller cables, and they've been fracturing, and that's part of the puzzle that instigated the construction of the third bridge. We do still use the Forth Road Bridge, the middle one. However, it's now on light duty, so it's just buses and very nearly enough to span the circumference 747s. The new bridge is taller than the old road bridge at 683 feet above the high tide, and that's equivalent to 22 London buses stacked end to end. This bridge has wind shielding, so it shouldn't have to close at all due to weather. And even more important, this bridge features a dehumidification system to reduce moisture that causes corrosion. Now that's a valuable lesson learned from the failure of the cables on the old bridge. Became known as the floating railway, engineered by Thomas Podge. Port Edgar is a name of the young marina, ferry terminus linking the Lothians to Fife in the north of Scotland for almost 12 years. Port Edgar, or then HMS Columbine, served as torpedo-boat destroyers for the First World War and was a minesweeping base in the Second World War, but by then was named HMS Lochilda. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, the barracks were used as holiday camp accommodation for poor families from Edinburgh.